Hello everyone, I am Professor Ajit Kumar. This session is in continuation of the discussion Dr. Kshema Jose and I had regarding the origins of interpersonal communication. Today's lecture is about the barriers in communication. This lecture is an attempt or an exercise to explain the various barriers that have already been shared with you earlier. I would recommend that you listen to this lecture after reading the text on barriers shared with you earlier. Let's get started. Barriers. What are barriers? Of course, we all know the term barriers. How are they problems or how do they influence interpersonal communication? Let's look at perhaps a very simple definition of barriers first. Barriers are factors that cause noise while communicating. Noise while communicating. And what is noise? Noise, again in very simple terms, are hurdles, impediments, obstructions, difficulties. Anything that causes impediments, hurdles, obstructions, or any sort of difficulty in a communication transaction is deemed noise, and that noise becomes a barrier in making sense. If you recall, we had said earlier that communication, especially interpersonal communication, is all about meaning making, not just about interpreting or deciphering incoming messages. It's about meaning making. And noise prevent at times, too much noise, the meaning making process. Noise prevents meaning making. Noise distorts communication. Noise at times causes total breakdown as well, right? And we are going to look at these factors which influence the effectiveness of interpersonal communication. If you look at the screen, it says noise affects all elements of interpersonal communication. The common belief is that noise affects only the channel. That's an erroneous assumption. Noise affects all elements involved in the process of communication. I will of course share more details regarding the various elements of communication in another lecture. But for now, please note that noise is not limited or restricted to just the channel alone. Instead, it affects all elements involved in meaning making, in interpersonal communication. Barriers may be external or internal. What do I mean by that? Simply put, barriers could be outside of the interlocutors. Interlocutors are the people or persons involved in communicating. So, the barriers could be external, in the sense outside, present in the environment but outside the interlocutors. Or it could be internal, which means the barriers are present in the interlocutors, right? What is present in the interlocutors may not be visible, may not be tangible, whereas most of the external barriers are tangible. That's why I said the barriers may or may not be tangible. Most of the internal barriers are not tangible, whereas the external barriers mostly are tangible. Why do we need to know of barriers? Why is this discussion on barriers important? Why do we need to understand barriers or study about barriers? Well, the simple reason is, if you know them, if you know the barriers, if you know of barriers and their effect or impact on interpersonal communication, you will be able to take corrective or remedial action to minimize the impact of barriers on your message or on the meaning making process, right? Now, since I have classified barriers as external and internal, it's only fair that I give you some more details of both. I'll start with external. This inappropriate venue is an external barrier. What do I mean by inappropriate venue? Well, where you transact communication, where the communication transaction happens, plays a very important role in successful meaning making, in successful understanding or comprehending of the message and reacting to that, of course, right? What about the place? Why is the place very important? If the place is not conducive, the venue is not conducive, it's let's say a very noisy atmosphere. You are trying to have a very serious conversation in a pub or a discotheque, right? The surrounding noise of all sorts, right? Not just not the audio noise alone, noise of all sorts, lights, movement, and other colors and all that. All of them will obstruct, will prevent you from making full sense of what the other person is saying. And remember, you react to what you have made sense of. If what you have made sense of or your meaning making is flawed or faulty, your reaction will be based on that. If the venue is not conducive to the message that you are attempting to convey and make sense of, or conducive to the transaction, it will become a barrier. It may, I'm not saying all barriers will always have a predictable effect or outcome. I'm not saying that, but these barriers have the potential to impact negatively your transactions, right? Therefore, the wrong place, if you choose the wrong place to convey the message, that would have to be considered as a barrier. Channel disturbances. Proper channel. What's a channel? I'm sure I have mentioned this earlier. Channel is the pathway along which your signs travel from you to the other person and from the other person back to you. The pathway, right? It could be air in a face-to-face conversation in a or in a room, or it could be wire, like over telephone, a wired telephone, that is the old-fashioned telephone, or it could be a combination of wire and air. Disturbances on the channel, disturbances affecting the channel can and will affect the quality of your communication transaction, the quality of your message. For instance, if it's a bad phone line, we have all experienced this. a bad phone line clunks and buzzes and screeches on the line. You cannot hear what the other person is saying. You get snatches of the other person's message and you are struggling to make sense of what the other person is saying, and the same goes for the speaker as well, because your reply is also adversely, negatively impacted by channel noise. If someone or the person you are having a conversation with, the person you are interacting with, has very strong body odor. I know, right? Very strong body odor, right? That will act as channel noise. It's a channel disturbance. If the person you are interacting with has overwhelming body odor, you are going to have difficulty making sense of the incoming message, and you are going to have serious difficulty framing appropriate responses. You are distracted, disturbed by this unpleasant, unwelcome odor, malodor. Same goes for all sorts of odor. Even perfumes, if it's too powerful, it can have the same effect. It doesn't have to be malodor. And you're stuck with this person, and he's attempting or she is attempting to communicate with you, ask you questions, be nice to you, small talk, you see, but this is putting you off. That is a barrier. You want to terminate that transaction as quickly as possible, because the odor, the smell, the too powerful smell is affecting you. Distracting visuals are also examples of channel disturbances. What do I mean by distracting visuals? Let's say you and I are having a conversation, we are talking about something, and I see a very fancy bike passing by, right? My attention, my focus shifts from you and my message to the bike, right? And that compromises the quality of my message, of my transaction, my transmission, as well as your reaction to my message. Channel disturbances are not limited to speaking alone. You will notice channel disturbances even in writing, right? A classic example of that would be a doctor's prescription. Inappropriate media. See, there is an appropriate, you have to choose the right medium to convey a message, right? And very often, these mediums are culturally oriented, are determined by culture. For example, a soldier who was killed in action. News of the soldier's martyrdom or his death cannot be communicated to his dear and near ones. We would not even dream of it via a WhatsApp text. The medium is wrong. Not even an email, right? You have to, and in most civilized countries, officers of the corps, they go to the soldier's house, meet the family, break the news and express their condolences. That is the right way to communicate a certain message. Inappropriate media completes my list of external barriers. But please note that my list is not an exhaustive one. There are many more external barriers. What I would urge you to do is think of more such barriers, as well as think search for more instances of the barriers that I have already discussed with you. In this session, we are going to discuss internal barriers. if you recall, I had already mentioned that external barriers are outside of the interlocutors, whereas internal barriers are present in the interlocutors, within the interlocutors, right? Most internal barriers are pre-existing in the communicators, in both the communicator as well as the communicatee, in the participants of the interaction. They pre-exist in them. Let's look at them one by one. Strong emotions. Strong emotions are very powerful internal barriers. Examples of strong emotions would be fear. If you are fearful of the person you are interacting with, you are transacting with, that is going to influence your thought process, your articulation, your reaction, and so on. Fear is a strong emotion that often impedes communication or meaning making. Likewise, anger. If you are angry with the person or with something else or someone else, if anger is in the picture, if you are angry, either you or the interlocutor, if one of the interlocutors or both interlocutors are upset or angry about something, that again will have a very negative impact on meaning making, on communication. Think about it, right? You must have all experienced this sometime or the other. One more example of a strong emotion would be shame. If you are experiencing shame about something, could be the subject matter of the interaction, the topic of the interaction, could be something to do with the interlocutor. Whatever it is, if you are about yourself, you are feeling shame, you are feeling shameful, or feeling ashamed of what you are wearing or how you look like or how you speak or whatever your appearance, that also will have a very negative effect on your thought processes and your ability to communicate, to articulate your thoughts, as well as make meaning of incoming messages. Strong emotions. This is again not a exhaustive list, it's not a complete list. You can add many more to this thing, to strong emotions. I just mentioned 3 of them. Tendency to jump to conclusions. There are people, I have come across people who have a tendency to jump to conclusions. They have already made assumptions about what you are going to say, about your message, right? Those assumptions could be based on previous experiences with you, with the same interlocutor or with other interlocutors. Doesn't wait for you to finish to make sense. Completes your messages for you from his own expectations and assumptions, her own expectations and assumptions. Here is another internal barrier, preoccupation. If one of the interlocutors or both, are preoccupied with something else, that is, if you are thinking of something else, you can't be focusing on formulating your messages or making meaning of incoming messages, because your attention is divided between what's going on in your mind and the ongoing transaction. You're trying to speak to somebody on some topic, but you are at the same time thinking of argument you had with your mom, your dad, with your parents or your friend or your siblings that morning. You had a very serious argument, right? And you're still smarting. Right? If you are thinking of that, you are preoccupied with that, you are not going to be able to give your 100% to the ongoing transaction. That is an internal barrier. Cross-cultural interaction. This again is a very interesting barrier. People often are either unaware of it or don't know what to do about it. Here, the interlocutors are from different cultures. The speaker and the listener are not from the same cultural background. They are from different cultures. When two cultures interact, when two cultures attempt to transact communication or messages, cultural barriers come into play. Let me give you a few examples of that. The use of the term madam has very interesting connotations across cultures. The term madam is a very polite and respectful way of addressing a woman. That's what you would see if you looked up a dictionary. But what you should also be aware of is that it is extremely formal and ordinarily used only with women of distinction, women in power, or an older and married lady, or customers in a business establishment. In English, term madam is not ever prefixed to a name, though in French it is. For example, you have Madame Curie, Madame Rousseau, etc. The thing is, women in English speaking countries like America or Britain or Australia generally disapprove of being addressed as madam, except in the earlier mentioned circumstances. Let me refresh your memory quickly. Women in power, women of distinction, older or married women, or customers in a business establishment. In fact, women in English speaking countries, in fact, they get very annoyed and even turn hostile if madam is used inappropriately with them. However, in India, we use madam to address or refer to women of all ages, regardless of their marital status or occupation. Every woman for us, other than our dear and near ones, we use the term madam while interacting with. In fact, in India, it is considered impolite to not address a woman as madam. If we do not use madam with women other than our dear and near ones in India, it could lead to annoyance. It could cause hostility. Whereas in the West, if you use madam with every woman you come across or meet or interact with, it would cause problems or issues or negativity in the interaction. Imagine the confusion and miscommunication when an Indian addresses an American or British teacher or nurse or a policewoman or even a colleague as madam. Imagine the damage it will do to the interaction. One more example should make this cross-cultural barrier clear to you. One more. In India, it's quite common to ask, what's your good name? What's your good name? Right? It makes no sense to people from the Western civilizations. In our culture, we don't directly ask the person for his or her name. We ask for Shubh Naam. Aapka Shubh Naam kya hai? That's our culture. But in a Western culture, you don't say the question is not what's your good name, because they then view it as, are you implying that I have a bad name as well? That could cause misunderstanding, miscommunication. Cross-cultural transactions are a big challenge. You've got to learn to deal with them, otherwise it can lead to serious misunderstandings and miscommunication. Linguistic proficiency, inadequate linguistic proficiency. That is again a major barrier. See, you need to know the code. If you do not know the code, which is both verbal and non-verbal, if you do not know the code, you can end up causing a lot of confusion in the transaction, right? Or the other person do not know the code, you can end up misreading the message, misunderstanding the message. Such difficulties can arise from pronunciation. It can arise from vocabulary. It can arise from grammar, right? I'll give you examples. A lot of Indians pronounce S-N-A-C-K, the word S-N-A-C-K as snake. It's inaccurate pronunciation. The correct pronunciation is snack. A lot of Indians mispronounce it as snake. Imagine somebody asking you whether you'd like some snakes during tea. Another common mispronunciation is Jew for zoo. Zoo is often mispronounced as Jew. Imagine someone asking a native speaker in somewhere in England or America or Israel or wherever they speak English, asking them for directions to a Jew. Imagine the confusion it will create, right? Sentence structure, if the structure itself is wrong, that can cause confusion. There is no any water in my cup. It's causing confusion. There is no any water in my cup. Sometimes informal language, we all know that language is formal, neutral and informal. I won't go into the details of that. But if you use informal language in formal occasions or vice versa, it can result in a linguistic confusion. For example, the expression okay, that itself is informal, right? But if you want to make it more informal, it would be like okie dokie. Okie dokie. Imagine a situation where someone you respect, someone older than you, someone maybe your boss or your teacher or someone asks you to do something and you respond with okie dokie. It is not wrong, but it is inappropriate and therefore is a barrier. The teacher will immediately jump to the conclusion or will think that you are an impertinent person and it is impudence on your part to respond with okie dokie, because that is informal and you don't use it in formal situations. These barriers, both internal and external, together wreak havoc on interpersonal communication if we do not cope with it. We need to deal with this. You cannot wish them away. And I am going to tell you next about coping strategies. These are just strategies. You need to work these things out in detail later, but these are suggestions for how one could cope with the various barriers that we encounter in interpersonal communication. How can we deal with them? First point, according to me, reconcile to the inevitability of barriers in interpersonal communication. Realize and accept, recognize and accept. There is no running away from barriers. There is no avoiding barriers. Practice active listening. Now, this is an interesting concept. For a long time, it was believed that in interaction, in communication, the onus of successful, effective communication lay with the communicator, that is the speaker. And the listener's job was only to decode, decipher what he or she received. That was what it was believed for a very long time, right? That is passive listening. If you are now, the belief is that all interlocutors, both interlocutors are equally responsible for the success of the transaction. Both, just not the speaker alone. The listener has also got to meet the speaker halfway. The listener has to practice active listening, provide support and scaffolding to the speaker so that he or she might be able to complete his or her message satisfactorily, effectively, and then you can react accordingly. Active listening is no easy task. It doesn't come automatically, or it's not default. You got to practice it. Next one is be sensitive to other cultures and their practices. Please understand that ours is not the only culture. There are various cultures out there in the world, and all those cultures have different their own practices. And when cultures meet, different cultures meet, there is bound to be some issues, some rough edges, some confusion. There has to be some give and take. There has to be some patience. There has to be some tolerance. It's very important that we be sensitive to the norms of other cultures. We need to be sensitive to the fact that different cultures have different practices, and therefore adjust to those. Be more tolerant. Be flexible. Demonstrate empathy, fairness, a sense of fairness. These are personal qualities, right? These are not evident only in communication. These ought to be evident in every transaction of every aspect of your life, right? Flexibility, willingness to give the other person a chance, willingness to accept merit of an opposing argument, right? Empathy, be empathetic to others' issues, concerns, challenges, a sense of fairness, intellectual honesty. All these help you cope with these barriers. These are some of the coping strategies that I would recommend. This is not necessarily a complete list. Please add to it. And also think of ways of putting these suggestions or recommendations into practice. Thank you very much.